This is your before and after story, where your first steps towards a new life-changing career begin. Southeastern College can take you there. We offer in-demand hybrid and online programs with hands-on training, led by in-field career professionals, and career services to put you on the path to a rewarding and fulfilling future. This is where your transformation begins. Southeastern College, your future is bright. Visit sec.edu to get started.
You're listening to The Murder in My Family, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including Missing Persons, DNA ID, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
and
Citizen Detective.
all of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its host, or sponsors. If you would like to discuss the murder in your family on this podcast, please be sure to visit themurderinmyfamily.com for more information. You can support this podcast by visiting patreon.com/themurderinmyfamily. This episode may contain unsettling material or subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Murder in My Family. I'm your host, Mike Morford. In this episode, we'll be discussing the case of a bright 25-year-old Harvard student who vanished in 1981 under very mysterious circumstances. A decade later, her body was found, which only deepened the mystery that today remains unsolved. We'll dive into this case after some quick housekeeping. Independent podcasts like this one depend on word of mouth to bring in new listeners. So if you find that you enjoy this show, please take a minute to rate and review it wherever you listen to your podcast. And be sure to introduce a friend to the show and invite them to listen. With your help, The Murder in My Family can continue to grow and reach a new audience. To learn more about the show or the cases we discuss, please visit themurderinmyfamily.com. You can also find us on Twitter with the handle @MurderInMyFam, or by searching for the Murder in My Family podcast on Facebook. If you'd like to support this show through a Patreon donation, it's always appreciated, and you can do so by visiting patreon.com/The Murder in My Family. Benefits of supporting the show on Patreon include early access to ad-free episodes of the show, plus bonus content not heard in regular episodes. Support may also include thank you cards, stickers, and more. If you prefer to, you can also support the show through a PayPal donation by visiting paypal.me/The Murder in My Family. In each episode, I'll give shout-outs to any new supporters. And thank you to all of the supporters that generously donate to help keep the show growing and improving. One last note. Please consider supporting any of the sponsors that you hear on The Murder in My Family, the way that those sponsors support the show. It's with our sponsor support that the show can go on and continue to provide a platform to share these stories with you in every episode. Thank you. And now on with the show. Joan Lucinda Webster was born on August 19, 1956, in Dayton, Ohio, to parents George and Eleanor Webster. She had an older brother, George Stephen, who went by Steve, and a sister named Anne. In 1957, the Webster family moved to New Jersey. Growing up, Joan was smart, and she was driven to succeed. She attended Glen Ridge High School and graduated in 1974. From there, she attended college at Syracuse for undergraduate education, and she earned her degree in design. A gifted student, Joan earned several awards and was on the dean's list. After graduating, Joan moved to New York City, where she lived on the Upper East Side with 2 roommates. She worked for the architectural and design firm Skidmore, Owens & Merrill. In 1980, Joan began a 3-year program at the Harvard School of Design in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And while Joan did casually date, she was mainly focused on her studies and career goals. In 1980, Joan began a 3-year program at the Harvard Graduate School of Design in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She lived there in a dorm room at Perkins Hall. On November 28, 1981, Joan Webster flew from New Jersey, where she had spent Thanksgiving break with her family in Glen Ridge, and landed at Logan Airport in Boston at around 10 p.m. She was supposed to go straight to her dorm, only 8 miles west of Logan Airport, but she never made it there. She was last seen carrying a red purse, a tote bag, and a navy blue Lark suitcase. Witnesses at Logan Airport, who saw her in the baggage area, recalled that she waved to someone. At around 10:30 p.m., she left the baggage claim area and stepped outside using the door to the Eastern Taxi Terminal. But it turns out that Joan didn't take a taxi that night. Taxi driver Fenton Allen Moore was on duty and stepped out to help Joan load her suitcases into his cab. As per an UnsolvedMagazine.com article about Joan's case, Moore recalled that Joan tapped on his window and said Cambridge, and he loaded her suitcase into the trunk. But a man showed up and said, "I don't think we want this cab," and he proceeded to unload Joan's suitcase. This man was described as a middle-aged white male, under 6 feet tall, and about 160 pounds. He had glasses, wore an overcoat, had a thick beard, and was carrying a suitcase. Joan Webster told Fenton Allen Moore that the man was with her, and then the man took Joan over to a blue car waiting in the cab line. Fenton Allen Moore dismissed the incident and looked for his next fare. 3 days later, on December 1st, David Duncan, Joan's boyfriend and classmate, called her parents in New Jersey to ask if Joan was still home because she wasn't back in her dorm at Cambridge, and he wasn't the only one that noticed she was missing. Joan was a dorm proctor and had a handwritten note on her door with nightly hours of availability listed. She was an excellent and dedicated student and wouldn't have just shrugged off her responsibilities. Joan was reported missing on December 2nd, the same day that her red purse and her wallet with about $100 in cash missing from it were found 14 miles north of Logan Airport. A man found them in a marsh, known to be a dumping ground for crime-related activities. This was in Saugus, Massachusetts. Joan's tote bag, which she carried her credit cards and checkbooks in, as well as her suitcase, were still missing. Later that month, George Webster's company offered a $10,000 reward for information regarding Joan's disappearance, and it was later increased to $25,000 for any valid information and $50,000 for information leading to the capture of whoever was responsible for the disappearance. On January 29, 1982, Joan's suitcase was found in a Greyhound bus terminal. The search for Joan was extensive. 8 different police departments, 6 different FBI branches, Interpol, and private investigators all tried to piece together what happened and where Joan could be. The Websters received multiple phone calls claiming Joan was alive and trying to extort money from them throughout the years. Someone even anonymously called the Saugus police chief and told him to look into a connection between Joan Webster's disappearance and the case of a woman named Marie Iannuzzi, who was murdered in 1979. And the caller implicated one man in both cases, a man named Leonard Paradiso. But Paradiso didn't fit the description of the man seen with Joan at the airport when she vanished. Years went by with no answers in Joan's case. It wasn't until April 1990, almost a decade after she vanished, that Joan's body was found along a creek area off Chibocco Road in Hamilton, Massachusetts, almost 30 miles north of Logan Airport, where Joan was last seen. She was nude and had been placed into a trash bag that had broken underneath her. Eventually, her skull, which showed signs of blunt force trauma, had drifted down to Chibocco Road and was blocking a drainage pipe, which ultimately led to the discovery. Joan's remains had been covered by multiple layers of cut logs that authorities believe were placed over her remains at different times. While Joan's family finally had her remains, they still didn't have answers. Joan's former sister-in-law, Eve Carson, has her own theories. She published 2 books about the case, Mommy's a Mole, Unraveling the Joan Webster Murder and Other Secrets in a CIA Family, and another book, Simple, Safe, and Secret. Eve believes that Leonard Paradiso, who was ultimately found guilty of Marie Iannuzzi's murder and sentenced to life in prison, was framed, and that the Webster family, who she says worked for the CIA, was complicit in a cover-up with police. Eve said that to honor the value of Joan Webster's life, the current authorities tasked with the responsibility of her case must seek justice. The 1981 unresolved Joan Webster murder is solvable, according to Eve. She says Joan wasn't the type of person to go off with some unknown person or someone she just met. The man she was seen with that night when she vanished had to be someone she knew, or someone she was comfortable with, possibly an authority figure. Oddly, Despite that in Massachusetts, there are laws that dictate that a body can't be released for cremation when they're a victim of an unsolved murder, Joan's body was cremated at her parents' request on July 13, 1990. This was only months after her body was found, and her case had officially become a murder investigation. As Eve Carson said in Unsolved magazine, the Websters effectively closed the case when they had Joan's remains cremated. Eleanor Webster died in 2010, and George Webster died in 2018, and Joan's case remains unsolved to this day. If you have any information about the murder of Joan Webster, call the Hamilton, Massachusetts Police at 978-468-1212. Eve Carson, who's still seeking justice for Joan, remembers her former sister-in-law as warm, smart, and a funny person with a bright future, and she hopes Joan's case will be solved. Eve sat down with me to discuss Joan's case and the mysterious clues around it. That conversation is coming up in just a moment. Are you one of the millions of people who have experienced anxiety, stress, or sleepless nights? Then you could benefit from CBD. CBD isn't about what you feel. It's about what you don't feel. Stress, anxiety, and pain. With Feels, it's a better way to feel better. Feels is a premium CBD that will help to keep your head clear and feel your best. It's hassle-free and delivered directly to your door. CBD naturally supports reducing stress, anxiety, pain, and sleeplessness. There's no hangover or addiction. I've been using Feels to help me with some joint pain, and it does wonders. And it's safe and natural, without harmful side effects. Place a few drops of Feels under your tongue and feel the difference within minutes. The thing to remember about CBD is that finding your right dose is important, and everyone's dose is different. Feels even offers a CBD hotline with dosage experts to help guide your personal experience so that you find your perfect starting point. And the Feels dosage team is dedicated to making sure you get the best use of your CBD. And self-care has never been easier when you join Feels monthly membership. You'll save money on every order, and you can pause or cancel at any time. And if you need a dose of chill on the go, pop one of Feels' new CBD-infused mints for clear-headed feeling and fresh breath. Joining Feels monthly membership makes your self-care easy. You'll save money on every order, and you can pause or cancel at any time. Start feeling better with Feels. Become a member today by going to feels.com/family, and you'll get 50% off your first order with free shipping. That's Feels, FEALS.com/family. To become a member, get 50% automatically taken off your first order with free shipping. Feels.com/family.
Offer valid on standard browsers, U.S. only.
When I heard about Date My Age, I thought, really? But there I was in my empty, quiet house, my laptop on the kitchen counter, and I typed in my name. Looking for a man between the ages of 40 to 60? Sure, why not?
Date My Age is different. With verified profiles, you can feel safe and secure to explore meaningful connections with interesting and mature singles.
Date My Age made it really easy. I could join and view online profiles for free. All of a sudden, my empty house wasn't so quiet anymore. I got so much attention, it just made me feel seen and alive. Date My Age helped me start a totally new chapter in my life.
Find a friend, a lover, a partner at Date My Age. Get 60% off when you join at datemyage.com today. That's datemyage.com to connect with thousands of singles worldwide. datemyage.com.
I want to welcome Eve Carson to the show. She's coming on to discuss her sister-in-law Joan's case with us. Thank you for coming on and walking us through some of the details of Joan's murder case.
I'm delighted to bring this case to people's attention.
Yeah, it's a very fascinating case. There's a lot of intricate pieces and a lot of red herrings, perhaps, and different clues, and we'll weed through all that. But before we start working on that stuff, can you just tell us a little bit about Joan and what kind of person she was and some of your memories of her?
Absolutely. Joan was, at the time she disappeared, she's a 25-year-old graduate student at Harvard Graduate School of Design. Just a beautiful person. She was very bubbly, very personable. I don't know that I ever met anyone that didn't just absolutely love her. She was very bright, very accomplished student with a lot of awards. She loved the theater. She had lived in New York for a while, a couple years before she went back to school, and was a person that was full of life, very kind to others, very sharing, very giving. And it brings a lot of tears to my eyes, understanding the loss that we really had when Joan disappeared. I was the only non-blood relative who was part of the immediate family.
And how close were you and Joan? Were you pretty close, like, sister-in-law sometimes can be?
We were close. We didn't live in close proximity to each other where we would see each other all the time. But we did spend summer vacations together, some holidays, where we crossed paths. And she was just a very engaging person who made you feel that you had always been a part of her life. The night that she disappeared, I actually suffered a miscarriage that same night. So in some ways, I felt kind of a unique bond to her as this all unfolded. And it's something that's kept me very close to what really happened to her.
Yes, that must have been a very bad time for you personally, going through that. And then on top of that, Joan going missing.
Very emotional.
As far as Joan, she obviously is a Harvard student, so she's got to be pretty bright. What was she planning to do with her life? What kind of career goals did she have?
She had gotten her undergrad degree in interior design. She worked for an architectural firm in New York City before going back to school. So her aspirations were really in the architectural field.
And did she have a job, a permanent job set up that she was going to continue to work at, or was she sort of still going through the process of landing a permanent career job?
Not at that point. She was in the second year of a 3-year program, so she still had a little time left before she stepped out, into a career position. But she had, kind of put her personal life on hold. There were several young men that I knew that she had dated, very bright, very talented young men. And she kind of set that personal aspect of her life aside, not wanting to get deeply involved with someone until after she had finished her degree.
So she sounds like she was pretty focused and wanted, had a certain goal in mind, and she wanted to accomplish it.
Most definitely. She was a very dedicated, very accomplished person.
You mentioned that she had dated some bright young men. Did she share that kind of stuff with you about who she was interested in or dating or spending time with?
I had met actually several of them, but one young man that she was dating was actually a friend of mine. He had gone to school undergrad with and was a fraternity brother of my brother's. So, and then went on to Harvard Graduate School, Harvard Business School. So they met out there, started to date, something that I found very exciting. I was thrilled. He actually was planning to visit her at their home in New Jersey over the Thanksgiving break, which is not something most people were aware of.
So the family was living in New Jersey, or Joan herself was living in New Jersey at that time?
The family was from New Jersey, and she disappeared over Thanksgiving weekend. She had been home in New Jersey for the break and went back to Harvard in, the Boston area a day early from that break. Originally, she had planned to have a visit from my friend, her friend, to kind of a meet the parents sort of visit.
Gotcha. And so during this Thanksgiving break, was it just a typical break where she's just unwinding, seeing people, spending time with family? Was there anything eventful or anything unusual that happened during that little time off?
Well, it's in hindsight, going back and looking at it, there were some unusual aspects. Yes, they did the normal, typical things, visiting friends. They lived in a rather small community in New Jersey and would visit a lot of friends. They took a day trip to visit her grandmother in Pennsylvania for Thanksgiving Day. They went to the theater Friday night in Manhattan. But the thing that was unusual was the fact that the visit from her friend got canceled, and George, her father, actually planned a business trip, which was highly unusual for him. So that aspect of it, as I look back on it and kind of see how the pieces have come together, that concerns me. Very patriarchal family. Whatever George dictated is what everybody abided by.
Okay, and so that day, her parents and I think her sister, if I'm correct, drove her to the airport in Newark.
Yes, that is correct, and that too was unusual. George was always the one to make airport runs himself, and they had gone to two parties that evening before Joan's flight, local, very close to the Webster's home. They easily could have dropped her mother and her sister back at the house, but instead they took the ride to Newark Airport to drop her off.
And from there, she took a flight to Boston. Is that correct?
That is correct. Eastern Flight 960 from from Newark Airport to Logan.
And as far as we know, as far as it's been confirmed, she is known to have arrived at the airport. Is that correct?
Yes. She was seen at the airport, and she had talked to, other passengers on her flight. That was confirmed. She waved to a couple of friends at the luggage carousel. She did indeed arrive at Logan. The story that came out following that was, though, that after she collected her luggage at the luggage carousel, she vanished without a trace. Over the course of really researching her case, I learned that was not true. She was seen.
And we'll definitely talk about that, because I think there's even a man that she was seen with, and we'll get into that. So we know she arrived there. When she gets there, she's got to go, I assume, to back to college. Is that where she was heading?
She was headed back to her dorm room for classes to start on Monday.
Okay, and she took a taxi cab, is that correct?
She engaged a taxi cab, a town taxi, to drive her back to Cambridge. And
I assume they identified the cab driver?
They did identify the cab driver. He gave quite a good description, very good description of Joan, but also gave a description of the man that she was seen with in the cab line. That was the piece that was never reported. That information was suppressed.
And this man, was he just standing there having a casual conversation? Could it be just another traveler, or was it some kind of indication that perhaps she knew this man?
As I look at the circumstances that were there, I think it's pretty clear that this was someone she knew. She traveled alone, so she arrived at Logan alone. She was seen talking to a man behind the counter in the luggage carousel area, and then went out to the cab line. She engaged the cab, her suitcase was loaded, and then she turned and told the cabbie that there was someone with her. That's when the man appeared. He also had a suitcase, so was likely traveling himself.
Now, did this man actually get in the cab with Joan?
No, as the cabbie started to load his luggage, the man got argumentative and got into a discussion with the cabbie that he didn't like how he was handling the bag. The cabbie described it as being a very heavy suitcase. And the man turned to Joan and said, "We don't want to take this cab." And Joan's luggage was removed, and the two, Joan and this man, moved to another vehicle that was in the cab line.
So they took a second cab.
The description given by the eyewitness, the town taxi cab driver, he could not identify livery markings on the second vehicle. So whether it was a random car or another cab or an independent driver, it's really hard to say. But it was a blue vehicle and not a typical cab that the man would identify.
Yeah. So that person, whoever was driving that vehicle that was in line, they haven't been identified.
That is correct.
And well, so from there, we don't know that Joan's missing until a fellow student actually called the Websters to say, "Hey, Joan didn't come back for classes." Can you talk a little bit about finding out that she wasn't where she was supposed to be?
Yeah. It really was 3 days before the call came in. No one did a check arrival call for Joan. She didn't call back to the family. It wasn't until the following Monday that actually the call came in on Tuesday after Joan had missed classes all day Monday, and that was not typical for her to miss class.
And did her parents become concerned early on, or did they think maybe she just had, skipped out on class?
Joan wasn't the type of person to do that, and she wasn't the type of person to, just take off on a lark. But the parents are very interesting. They've got a unique background. They remained actually pretty calm and composed, but started doing a lot of calling to find out, where Joan might be. But it was a full 3 days, and I know that her mother didn't notify us until late that night, the second evening, and she was requesting the phone number of the young man that was supposed to visit Joan over the Thanksgiving break.
So they remain calm, and you mentioned that they have a unique background to where they were calm in that situation. Can you discuss that at all?
I can. Both George and Eleanor, Joan's parents, their initial careers and where they met, they had both worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. So these are very intelligent people with a unique background, which complicates, understanding this case. That's for certain.
Yeah, so I guess their training and the way they've conducted themselves lends to them staying calm in that kind of situation.
Yes, certainly.
And how quickly did the police become involved?
The police became involved, well, certainly on that Tuesday when Eleanor started placing calls, and Joan's purse and wallet were actually found the very next day after that phone call. They found her wallet had been found in a marsh area along a Route 107, which was in a different direction from where Joan intended to go back to school. They found it. Clamor was out kind of fishing in the area, trumping through the marshes, and came across her wallet. Went back with a police officer later that day, and they found her purse as well.
Was this in the town of Saugus?
It was in the town, yeah. It was in the Saugus area, correct.
And this area that you're describing, it seems like it wasn't just like right there on the edge of the road. It seems like it was back in a pretty good ways. Is that a good way to describe it?
It was a 4-lane split road, and there's water on both sides, very marshy. The purse was not right by the side of the road. It was out in the marshes. So it looked as if someone had tossed it from a car, and it was on the southbound side of the road, headed back toward the airport and in the opposite direction of where Joan was ultimately found.
Yeah, and not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but she would eventually be found in Hamilton, and this is the Saugus area is somewhere between that and the airport, in the middle, I would say. Is that correct?
Not in the middle. The Saugus area where her purse was found was about 7 miles north of the airport. The area where her remains were found was about 25 miles north of the airport.
Okay. And there were things like were things in her wallet and her purse intact, like money, credit cards, any of that stuff?
The money was gone, and something I noticed that was missing were keys. She would have had to have keys getting back into her dorm room. Everything else was pretty much intact, her checkbook, cards, all sorts of identification, other miscellaneous items like makeup and a hairbrush and things like that were all there.
Did police tell her parents right away, hey, we found these things, and what was their reaction when they learned that some of that stuff had been found?
Well, actually, George Webster, Joan's father, learned about it first. There was a business card. George's business card was in Joan's wallet, and it had a written inscription on it to call this number if found. So the first call, when the clamor found the wallet, he actually called George Webster.
And then did George from there say, call the police? Or did George himself call the police?
The call had gotten transferred to the head of security with ITT. That was the company George worked for. And that individual instructed the man to make a report with the police, which the man did. And then a police officer went back with him to the area to find where they ultimately found the purse.
Now, this stuff is found. Obviously, that's not a good sign, but there's no sign of Joan. What was going on within the family? What were the thoughts? What were, some of the ideas of what happened? Did anyone have any theories or any suspicions early on?
Not that they expressed verbally to me. They, got people engaged. I mean, the number of departments that got engaged in this case was staggering. I mean, it was an overwhelming number of offices and agencies that became involved in this case. That was a red flag to me. The Websters immediately took a trip up to Boston, where they coordinated and spoke with different police officers and whatnot, who started conducting interviews around the airport personnel, just everybody they could think of, the passenger manifests off the various different planes that came in around the same time as Jones.
So at the time, early on, that didn't, am I correct to say that didn't strike you, but looking back now, that stands out to you?
It does stand out to me, looking back now. There were a lot of things that the family did not tell me, and that's very concerning. They very much had their hands on this investigation.
So you felt maybe because of their connections and their pool that they had some role in how it was conducted, the investigation?
George's fingerprints are all over this investigation. I found some correspondence that he had with the FBI on how he was directing various different district attorneys' offices and whatnot. And I found that he had some influence and impact in witnesses that were brought out later that tried to tie some pieces together in a theory on what happened to Joan. The initial thing that came out was trying to suggest this was just a random act. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that really was not the case. One thing I learned when I started to dig into this case, aside from the fact that she actually had been seen at the airport, was the fact that the police kind of tagged a suspect very early on, and it was more than a year before they actually made that public. So they were kind of doing some things that weren't so kosher.
Offer valid on standard browsers, U.S. only.
When I heard about Date My Age, I thought, really? But there I was in my empty, quiet house, my laptop on the kitchen counter, and I typed in my name. Looking for a man between the ages of 40 to 60? Sure, why not?
Date My Age is different. With verified profiles, you can feel safe and secure to explore meaningful connections with interesting and mature singles.
Date My Age made it really easy. I could join and view online profiles for free. All of a sudden, my empty house wasn't so quiet anymore. I got so much attention, it just made me feel seen and alive. Date My Age helped me start a totally new chapter in my life.
Find a friend, a lover, a partner at Date My Age. Get 60% off when you join at datemyage.com today. That's datemyage.com to connect with thousands of singles worldwide. datemyage.com.
Looking back now, it sounds like, and I don't want to speak for you, and at the end we can sort of get into maybe your theory or what you think happened or who's involved, but someone might look at Joan's father using whatever pull and power he had to find his missing daughter because he was worried about her. It sounds like, and again, I don't want to speak for you, but it sounds like you doubt that.
That was certainly my take at the time. You assume that family is telling you the truth. Obviously, you can kind of empathize and put yourself in that position. If it's your child, you're going to be doing whatever you can, moving heaven and earth to find her or find out what happened. As I was actually able to recover documents that are relevant in Joan's case, I found that that really was not the case at all. There were things that were being diverted, covered up, kind of kept secret, and ultimately the theory that everybody landed on, the kind of the central group investigating Joan's disappearance, came out with a theory that is completely false.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about that as we go along. Something happened not long after Joan went missing. She went missing on that last week of November, and then on December 18th, less than a month after she vanished, there was a phone call that came in that sort of sent the case in a new direction. It was some kind of extortion call. Can you tell us about that call and what the caller said?
Yeah, there were at least 3 different extortion incidents that I was aware of, and none of those made the papers. This was a highly publicized case. It was all over the papers for years, but none of these instances were reported. They kind of kept these under the wraps. That first call in December, they weren't able to track the whole number when they taped the Webster's home line. However, they did get the exchange, and the exchange actually came out of the same area where the ITT offices were, where George worked. And the caller wanted, $20,000. He wanted it in small bills. He warned them not to call the police and wanted to meet with George. They gave him instructions meeting him at an intersection in New York City. The extortion incident did not pan out. It was not a legitimate, the person really had no knowledge of Joan.
Did they wind up identifying that person?
Not that I am aware of, although they did identify another extortionist that happened the following year.
So this was like a sort of setting a precedent for things that would happen in moving forward in the case.
Right.
So the same month that that call came in, that's when the composite sketch of a man that was seen with Joan was created. Can you discuss that sketch and the background of it, and did it help? Did it generate any leads or anything like that?
The taxi driver that Joan had engaged at Logan Airport gave the police a description of the man that was with Joan in the taxi line. And a composite was made. It was made from what's called an identikit. It wasn't a hand-drawn sketch, but made from templates, one laid over the other. That composite I never saw until I started researching Joan's case. I was able to get it reconstructed in 2009. It was only maybe a little over a year ago that I actually was able to get the police report of that description that helped kind of consolidate my impression of what that composite is. The man that was with Joan was identified as a middle-aged white male traveling. He had on wire glasses. They showed him with a beard, curly dark hair. They indicated that the hair was not as kinky as the composite reflected. That lead was never circulated other than within police departments. The Websters had a copy of that lead, of that composite, on December 21st, 1981. So shortly after Joan disappeared. They never shared that certainly with me. Whether they shared it with other members of the family, I don't know. I doubt it. That lead remained locked in the files.
So if there really was this man that was seen with her, and I don't know why the taxi driver would have any reason to make it up, assuming that there was a real person that looked like that had some kind of, might have more information, you'd think they would have wanted to circulate that sketch and get that out to as many people as possible, and let people maybe come forward to say, hey, I know who that is. But that didn't happen.
That did not happen, and that's exactly right. If you're looking for a missing member of your family, as I said, you want to move heaven and earth. But nobody knew about the composite other than, a couple of different police departments. And something very strange that I noticed in police files that I recovered was on the same day that the New Jersey Police Department was called with template numbers to create the composite for the Websters, there was another call that came in from the head of ITT security. He had called and said that they were possibly going to put together a composite of a man based on a psychic's vision. And to me, that just struck me as very odd. Those two calls came in pretty much back to back. It was within the same hour. And it really kind of distorts your impression of, what composite are you looking at? What information are you looking at? One from a psychic is certainly not going to be as reliable as one from an eyewitness. And as far as the eyewitness lead, that was actually verified to an extent. The dispatcher heard the discussion, the exchange between the man kind of squabbling about the handling of his suitcase. And the dispatcher got on the radio with that cab driver and asked if there was a problem. So, obviously an eyewitness is going to be far more reliable than a psychic.
Sure, absolutely. Now, even though they didn't circulate the sketch, was there any indication in the reports that the police worked to try and identify that man?
There is no evidence that they worked to try and identify it, and it was shortly thereafter. That was in December, end of December. As of January, the Websters went to Boston and offered a reward for information leading to Joan's whereabouts. What I find odd there was that they didn't mention the lead, they didn't mention the composite, and shortly thereafter, almost immediately thereafter, there was a call that came in, and the woman identified the suspect that they went after then for the next however many years. And the man absolutely was not the man in the cab line. He was much larger, and no way he could have been the individual.
Yeah, and we'll definitely talk about that too, because a couple different names I think have been tied to this case. As far as the man in the beard, he's obviously never been identified, but from the cab driver's account, Joan and him seem to know each other. Would she have ever been, traveling with someone that she wasn't friendly with or didn't know well? Would she, or was she guarded that she wouldn't do that?
No. Joan had actually been a victim of a purse snatcher in New York City at one point. Joan was very cognizant of her surroundings. She had a very level head. She was not a big partier or anything like that. She was just a very down-to-earth person and would have been cognizant of her surroundings. she would not have switched cars with someone she didn't know.
So it sort of reinforces the fact it wasn't a random traveler that just happened to be with her. She would have trusted him to go in a private car or whatever.
Correct.
Now, looking back, in since you've seen that sketch, since it's out there and now on the internet, people can find that sketch and sort of look at it. It's a very distinct looking individual. Has anyone ever come forward, any of Joan's friends or fellow students or anyone in the family, to say this person looks like so-and-so, or I think it may be this person?
No, well, I take that back. You have, as you well know, with your background on research you've done on the Zodiac, I have a lot of people that kind of try to convince me that is Gareth Penn, but no, it is not. When I started trying to compare the photograph, I got very concerned about a resemblance to the lead police officer on Joan's investigation. Has a striking resemblance. I've got several photographs of that officer that I've compared to the composite. I think that is probably what led to the Essex County District Attorney's Office releasing the police report to me with the fuller description of the man. The man is not the police officer. Again, the police officer was a much larger man than the man that was with Joan. So this is a man that was really about the same size as George Webster. The only discrepancy with that would be that George Webster did not have a beard. George Webster was clean shaven. This individual had a beard, as described.
So it's frustrating because, again, that just looking at that sketch, it's pretty. Someone out there at that time had to know someone that sort of looked like that sketch, but yet no one came forward. That's got to be pretty frustrating.
No one came forward, and of course, the fact that she moved to a different car really changes the tone of how you look at the case, because there was also someone driving that car. So now there's more than one individual likely who abducted Joan from the airport.
Yeah. And so if that's a possibility that this was some kind of staged thing to get Joan to not take a cab and to get into, it sounds like it could be a ruse. Hey, you're being, you're not taking care of my luggage. Let's take a different car. It sounds like maybe that was something that could have been set up all along.
That is how it strikes me. It sounds very contrived, because that is the point then that Joan disappeared, and now we know certainly what happened to her. And neither of those individuals, the man with her or the man driving the second car, have been identified. No one came forward. No one else was missing. They were working in tandem as far as, I can assess. I mean, that's taken in consideration with a lot of other reports and documents that I've recovered.
Yeah, you think they would have, if those people didn't have anything to hide and they were just, innocent people that wound up looking guilty, you think with all the publicity they would have said, I need to come forward and say, hey, that was me, with her at the taxi or driving that car, yet that didn't happen.
I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah. And it was publicized right from that beginning.
Sure. So it's not like a case that didn't get any press. This had a lot of attention on it.
Yes, it did.
Yeah. And by December 25th, 1981, I assume the family is desperate. It's Christmas time. You mentioned they made an appeal for help, and a $10,000 reward was offered. Did that bring in any tips or leads, that announcement of that reward?
They did a pre-taped appeal that aired on Christmas Day, 1981. There was no reward tied to that particular appeal. The reward was offered in January. I believe it was the 19th of January. And there was a call. an anonymous call that came in the very next day to the Saugus police. And the woman who called, she didn't identify herself at the time. She has later since been identified through court records. But the woman accused a man by the name of Leonard Paradiso of Joan's disappearance, and also accused him of murdering another woman, a 1979 murder that had not been resolved. And that's at the point where those two cases got fused together and really confused and made for a very chaotic and sensational case that got aired through the media all for years.
Yeah, and they really ran with that, it seems like, and really went down that path.
Most definitely. And as I really had to research that case as well to understand why they thought those two cases, should be viewed, and the same suspect was guilty of both, and found that case most definitely was a wrongful conviction. I saw so many discrepancies and really malfeasance that went on. It wasn't, incompetence. It wasn't human error. There were some very blatant things in those records that showed that was a wrongful conviction.
So this lady that had called in, her name was Patty Bono.
That's correct.
What was her motive in calling? Did she elaborate on why she called and why she provided that information?
With the information that I learned later about her, and she did testify in a hearing, Patty Bono grew up in the north end of Boston, kind of an Italian community. She grew up there with Leonard Paradiso, and she also grew up there with a man by the name of Carmen Tamero, who was at the time Joan disappeared, was one of the lead officers handling Joan's investigation. He was part of the Massachusetts State Police. That was an area and an era in time where people had a lot of vendettas. She claimed that Leonard Paradiso had assaulted her in 1972. In scrutinizing her testimony, it really doesn't hold up. Matter of fact, there is evidence that kind of contradicts some of the things that she said in court. It was really a she said allegation, and I don't believe it was true.
Now, Leonard Paradiso, what was he in prison for?
Leonard Paradiso, at the time Joan disappeared, was a parolee. He had been in prison for an assault conviction. I have not gone through those records. However, he was found in a very incriminating position and appeared to have tried to assault a young woman. Leonard Paradiso was not an angel. He was out on parole at the time that Joan disappeared. He was out on parole at the time that the other woman, the entangled case, was murdered. He had been at the wedding of that other victim. So there was at least a connection that could be made where his path had crossed with the other victim.
So this case that got connected, were there any similarities to Joan's case, any overlap or anything that sort of did fit to where the two cases might be connected?
No. The only connection that the former prosecutor and police were trying to make was they claimed that Leonard Paradiso was a sexual predator and he went after women with long, dark hair. Joan and the other victim both had dark hair. That's the only similarity. Even the circumstances of the cases themselves, the known facts, were not anything. There was no similarity whatsoever.
For Leonard Paradiso's part, was he questioned by the police, and did he have an alibi or anything like that?
He did. He was questioned by the police. His girlfriend was questioned by the police for the other crime. But what I found interesting, he was arrested for the other murder victim. And while he was in jail, Carmen Tamero came and visited him and Carmen Tamaro at that time accused him of murdering Joan on his boat. That was August 1st of 1982. So that was several months before Paradiso, it was made known publicly that he was their suspect. So as I view what happened in the other case, that was really used as a smokescreen. The warrants for the Iannuzzi case were not looking for anything related to her murder. They were looking for items related to the story that they were crafting about Joan's fate. I mean, it was really bizarre. They were looking, literally states right in one of the warrants, they were looking for Joan Webster lookalike photos.
Wow. So anything to sort of connect him to her crime.
To Joan.
Yeah.
Joan was the real object that they were going after Paradiso for. The Iannuzzi case kind of created a smokescreen and allowed them to put things out in the media. Every media story that talked about the Iannuzzi case also then turned to speculation about Joan's case. The two cases were improperly tied together. And I mean, they really piled on that poor guy. And I'm not saying he was a saint. Fine, if you want to consider him a suspect, then follow the facts, follow the evidence. They were making up evidence. I've traced all the different things they tried to claim tied Leonard Paradiso to Joan, and none of them fit. None of them pan out. It was just sheer speculation and driving a story through the media.
So it seems like it was a red herring. You think they spent a lot of time and effort chasing after him, and he didn't have anything to do with Joan's case. Yeah. Completely.
The real nail in the coffin for their case, they had claimed, their story was that he had picked Joan up at the airport, where they already knew that wasn't true, to the degree that there was a cabbie who did have Joan's luggage in his car. He gave the description of the man with her, and then the two moved to a different car. Paradiso did not fit the description of the man with Joan. On top of that, the story said that Paradiso had taken Joan to his boat, moored at Pier 7, and took her on board. This is November 28th. It was cold, it was wintry, it was windy. The boat ordinarily would not even be left in the water. But they claimed that he hit her in the head with a whiskey bottle on the boat when she refused his advances, and then he dumped her in Boston Harbor. Well, as the story later came out, and as I learned going through records, there are certified court records that Leonard Paradiso's boat was sunk in July of 1981, 4 months before Joan disappeared. The boat didn't exist when she disappeared. FBI lab reports affirm that was not the case. There is absolutely nothing that tied Leonard Paradiso or Joan to the boat. There was nothing there, but they continued to run with that story. Several years later, Joan's body turns up. It's not in Boston Harbor. It was buried in Hamilton, Massachusetts, more than 30 miles from where the boat had been moored earlier in the year before it was sunk. So the whole story falls apart. There's no crime scene. There's no evidence, nothing that tied him to Joan Webster whatsoever. Then as I go back and review the other case and see how evidence was mishandled, witnesses were threatened and coerced, changed testimony. I mean, none of the pieces fit. They just targeted a man. They crafted various scenarios and stories and, nailed him for a variety of different things that I don't believe he was guilty of.
Sounds like overall just a red herring, just someone that they
went
after and to heavy degree and probably should have been looking elsewhere.
I think one of the things that upsets me the most, the state police brought in a snitch. Carmen Tamero, who I indicated went to Paradiso's jail cell in August of 1982. He also was the one who led the interview of a jailhouse snitch, two-time convicted murderer, and came up with this same boat story. Problematic in the testimony and the written statements and the transcript of the interview that was conducted was the fact that they had the correct manner of Joan's death. And that's more than 7 years before her body surfaced. So there's a high degree of concern that police were actually involved in the crime. Certainly they were involved in covering it up.
Man, a lot of times when you hear that, I think a lot of people think, oh, that's just a crazy conspiracy theory. But in this case, there's a lot of stuff that just doesn't add up.
Yeah, there's evidence. And I've been very careful in making sure that everything that I come out with is fully backed up and documented. And I have recovered thousands of pages of records. Fortunately, as part of the family, I had some knowledge of some different places to look that others had not considered. So it gave me a more complete picture of just what all was going on. And I was able to, set up a spreadsheet, an Excel sheet on times, dates, places, names, who knew what and when. And it's very concerning who knew what and when, and yet they still continued to drive down this lane to implicate a man that they knew was not guilty.
We talked earlier about an anonymous phone call coming in. Then there was an anonymous letter in early 1982 that was mailed to the Boston Police Department saying that Joan was killed at a fraternity party. Can you talk about that letter, and was there any kind of merit in it, any kind of thing that was could have been real, or did it seem like something that was just totally made up for attention or whatever?
There were some leads that came in suggesting Joan had been killed at a fraternity party, and those areas, those events were checked out. Of course, most students hadn't even returned on Saturday night. They returned Sunday from the Thanksgiving break. Those leads did not pan out. The anonymous letter, though, that was received by one of the district attorney's office, that actually claimed that Joan was underwater in a bag, and I know they searched Walden Pond in regards to that letter. The thing that I found very interesting was that letter and where it was postmarked from Cambridge, Massachusetts. And at that same time frame, George Webster was in Cambridge, Massachusetts, staying at the Sheraton Hotel. And there is a letter, I have recovered an envelope and a letter that he mailed out on that same date from Cambridge. So a lot of strange twists and turns in the case.
That's interesting. I hadn't read about that.
And understandably, Joan was not in Walden Pond, but they searched it anyway. I mean, the number of departments and the number of agencies and offices that were involved in this was staggering. There were documents initialed by William Webster, who was the then director of the FBI in Washington. So this is very far-reaching. One of the other interesting connections I found in records was Tim Burke, who was the prosecutor going after Paradiso in Boston, kind of instigated a bankruptcy fraud case. And that case dealt with one of the key components of it was the boat or the alleged crime scene. Burke instigated that, and I noticed there was some high-powered communications that went higher up in Burke's office to the Department of Justice because it was the federal office that was prosecuting that case, the bankruptcy piece. And an individual that was contacted, he was identified only as via his initials, RSM, but the number 2 man at the Department of Justice at that time in Boston was Bob Mueller, and those are his initials.
Wow.
So there were some high-powered people watching this.
Sure. And I think most listeners would be familiar with Robert Mueller.
Yeah.
So it seems like this was a real roller coaster early on. You know, you've got letters being mailed and you've got phone calls with information. But then in January 1982, Joan's bag or suitcase was found. And I've seen it reported that it was found either in New York or Boston. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and I was always told, and it was reported locally in the Boston News, that the suitcase was found at the Park Square Greyhound bus station in Boston. And that was always what I believed. Then Tim Burke came out with his book when he wrote his book about this case, claiming it was found in New York City. And that was a question that I posed to the current custodian of Joan's case, and I was able to obtain records in regards to that. The suitcase was found in Boston. It had been put into a locker. The key was still missing. After 30 days, those lockers are opened and contents removed, and it's stored in a caged area for another 30 days in case someone claims it. After the end of that second 30-day period, someone noticed the tag and noticed that it was Joan's. Nothing was missing from it. The unusual aspect of it is just how it was portrayed. It took a while before the suitcase was sent to the FBI for analysis. I have all of their reports and whatnot. The former prosecutor, Tim Burke, claimed that his snitch told him about the contents of the suitcase and that there were a pair of gray shoes in the suitcase. That was not true. There was no footwear of any kind in the suitcase. The thing that is concerning is that the gray shoes that he claimed were in police evidence were contained in Joan's carry-on tote bag, and the carry-on tote bag was never recovered. So, again, it shines a light on how was law enforcement involved in this to have something that had not been recovered all of a sudden ending up in police evidence. The district attorney's office, who currently handles Joan's case, refuses to clarify if those shoes exist in police evidence or not.
It's you mentioned earlier that this was, you would believe this was at the Boston Greyhound bus station. And is that indeed where the locker was?
That's where the locker was, correct.
And that, I guess, since we're talking about multiple areas, you know, her wallet and purse were found in one area in was it Saugus? Her body would eventually be found in Hamilton. Where is Boston in relation to those two areas?
The Greyhound station was west of the airport. I would say maybe about 5 miles west of the airport. And the suitcase, they determined, was placed in that locker prior to 9:30 a.m. the following morning, November 29th.
Where her wallet and purse were found were east of the airport, is that correct?
No, they were 7 miles north of the airport.
So it sounds like between where the wallet and purse were found is going in a different direction from, or it's further away than where the suitcase was found.
Correct. There's another interesting fact to kind of put into the mix here. There was a very major fire in Lynn, Massachusetts that night. It had begun in a shoe factory early morning hours of November 28th, about 2:30 in the morning. This was a huge fire that burned for more than 2 weeks before they were ultimately able to put it out. At one point I read 12 alarm fire. I heard that 94 communities contributed to, helping with this fire. This was a huge fire. They had road blockades up and whatnot that obstructed a direct path from the airport to where Joan was ultimately found buried. So someone had to know how to get around that fire issue as well. The police officer who became the lead police officer in Joan's case, a man by the name of Andrew Palumbo, he lived north of Logan Airport. His route to work actually went directly by the area where the purse and wallet was found. But before getting to the roadblocks in Lynn, there was a turnoff that angled off just to the west of where the fire was. His residence was about 2 blocks from the on-ramp that then just a few miles down the road was the turnoff for where Joan's body was ultimately found.
Just touching on the suitcase one more time, it's strange because someone discarded and took the time, didn't take the time. They just threw it out wherever, throughout her purse and wallet. It was discarded, but then they took the time to lock the suitcase in a locker. What might be the reasoning? What's your take on the reasoning for doing that versus just throwing that out the window or throwing it into a lake or something?
I think it was something that was well conceived. Items found kind of spread out in all different areas would throw investigation off. Certainly the time with a suitcase locked in a locker added a certain cushion of time to kind of derail things. I think it was well conceived.
Over the years, obviously the case spun in all kinds of directions, but nothing really solid. A lot of red herrings, as we talked about. But you mentioned that there's a crazy theory that California's Zodiac killer was connected to Joan's disappearance, which I think is nonsense. There was even a caller that claimed Joan was still alive. How did your family sort of handle all of these rumors and theories and crazy twists?
Well, the one that you're indicating, the call that came about Joan still being alive, was an extortion call. The FBI from Newark was called in, and a group with George Webster flew to New Hampshire, where the call came from, and met with a man. At that point, he had been identified. He was a known felon. And he traveled with George Webster and an FBI agent who was posing as George's cousin to Boston, gave a bogus address, and ended up, being questioned then at the local FBI office. No charges were ever pressed. I mean, that bothered me as well. It's like, here you've got somebody taking you on a wild goose chase. George was wired. The car was wired. When you talk about an emotional roller coaster, this was an emotional roller coaster. I mean, you've got these extortion calls, you've got murder at sea, you've got Zodiac theories. It's really hard to absorb all of that. Through all of that, I never saw the Websters emotional at all, ever. Very stoic. Never saw them cry.
Over the years following the disappearance, it seems like some attention even turned maybe to Joan's parents themselves. I know that at one point some of Joan's belongings were taken from their home. Can you discuss some of those things that were taken, and was there some suspicion of her parents?
The items that were taken from the home were to try and find fingerprints to see if they could match them up with Leonard Paradiso. Of course, none of those panned out. All the lab reports, indicate there were no matches to anything with Leonard Paradiso. The parents, as far as whether they were ever considered, I don't know that they were ever scrutinized. George really had his finger on this investigation. He was really directing quite a few pieces of it that concerned me a great deal. Should the Websters be concerned? The Websters had certain information in their possession to know that Leonard Paradiso was not the culprit, and yet they continued to press that. I think that alone raises a red flag of why our parents not telling the truth and being forthcoming about the murder of their daughter. The other piece that they were aware of was the court case that found, the judge of that case found that Paradiso's boat did not exist above the water at the time Joan Webster disappeared. George was in a writing campaign to the Department of Justice all during that, basically petitioning to fry the guy. And, that's very concerning to me. The family was not honest with me. They were not honest. They were not open.
Offer valid on standard browsers, U.S. only.
When I heard about Date My Age, I thought, really? But there I was in my empty, quiet house, my laptop on the kitchen counter, and I typed in my name. Looking for a man between the ages of 40 to 60? Sure, why not?
Date My Age is different. With verified profiles, you can feel safe and secure to explore meaningful connections with interesting and mature singles.
Date My Age made it really easy. I could join and view online profiles for free. All of a sudden, my empty house wasn't so quiet anymore. I got so much attention, it just made me feel seen and alive. Date My Age helped me start a totally new chapter in my life.
Find a friend, a lover, a partner at Date My Age. Get 60% off when you join at datemyage.com today. That's datemyage.com to connect with thousands of singles worldwide. datemyage.com.
Well, almost a decade passed with no answers, and then that fateful day in April 1990 that a skull was found in Hamilton, Massachusetts. Can you tell us a little bit about how that discovery was made? Who found her remains? How did that unfold in the investigation that ensued?
It was in April of 1990, a very remote, heavily wooded area. There are very few houses back in there even today. A woman vet, her home sat up kind of high on a hill on a bluff above a lake, and she had gone out to walk with her dog on the lower part of her property. In that area, very often there were parts of that wooded area that get flooded with water, and certainly that had been the case after the spring thaw. Joan's skull had raised to the surface, probably from animal activity and the water in the area. Her skull had gotten lodged in a drainage ditch on the woman's property. She herself was a veterinarian, so she could recognize when she got close enough the zigzag suture-like marks on a human skull and realized what she had found right away. So police then got brought back into that area. This is a really hard area to find. It's a very narrow gravel road, very rutted. You get hikers that go back in there. Motorcycle people go back in there. There was some known criminal activity in that area, suicides and things like that. So this was an area very well known to the police, but very remote. Someone had to know that area to take her back in there. The police started a search, grid search, had a lot of volunteers, kind of broke the area up into sections, and found nothing for a while that tied to Joan's case whatsoever. About a week later, there were 3 police officers out in the area. They were just about ready to give up the search when an officer reached down into a decayed log and pulled out one of Joan's vertebrae. At that point, they had found the whole grave.
So she had been buried in a shallow grave?
She had been buried in a kind of a shallow basin, natural basin, covered with dirt, leaves, debris, and then a layer of cut logs. The power company went back in the area routinely to, thin out the timber and whatnot, and they just leave the logs there. So logs were stacked. The noticeable thing when I spoke to one of the officers involved in that recovery was that someone at some point later in time went back and put a second layer of logs over that spot. They could tell by the degree of decomposition of the lower layer of logs. Been out there for a long time.
Was there any indication that she had been out there the entire time, or is it possible she was buried there long after she went missing?
I believe that she was there the entire time, just based on the description and the degree of decay, as I said, of the first layer of logs. She was found in really a horrible condition. When they, got the full grave uncovered, she had been stripped of all clothing, and none of her clothing was found in that area. She still had a neck chain and a gold ring on the skeleton, but more generic jewelry, not something unique and identifiable. She had unique and identifiable jewelry with her. She had a gold charm bracelet that was never recovered. Joan also wore a gold signet ring with her initials. That was removed. That was not on the skeleton. She had a 2-inch by 4-inch hole in the right side of her skull. So she had taken a tremendous blow to the head, and that was the cause of death. She was thrown out in a black plastic trash bag. The trash bag, over, as I said, animal activity and moisture or flooding in that area over time, that trash bag broke open and the skull surfaced.
So this wasn't a case of someone just dumping her body there. They took some care to hide it and keep it from being found.
Yep, most certainly.
And I think you mentioned that likely someone that knew that, or it's not like someone would just casually drive by it and say, oh, that looks like a good spot. It seemed like a destination to dump her body.
This would be a destination. You had to take an exit off of the highway there. And as I said, the further back in you go, it's a very narrow, kind of rutted, gravelly road. And it's dark. I've been out there during the daytime, and it's still somewhat dark because of the, tree coverage. I mean, it's a thick wooded area.
Were there any other items or anything found, possible weapons or anything found with her body?
Actually, there was a gun in aluminum foil found in the vicinity, not right by her body, but that was determined had no connection to her death. The blow to the head, I don't know if they ever determined what it was. The lead investigator at the time of the recovery told me that it was probably something more like a bat or a limb, maybe a tire iron, something that was handy and convenient, but not traceable.
And obviously, we're talking about her body being buried, being wet, being out there in the elements for a decade. I think it's safe to say that DNA was not a possibility of someone that might have done this to her.
Right. DNA at that time wasn't even, science that was applicable. I don't know if it was in its infancy or not, but DNA was not really there. The skull, they do still have some hair fragments from her. There was still a little bit of hair on the skull, but everything had decomposed. And as you said, it was in the elements. It would have been contaminated. DNA, I don't know, would resolve anything at this point, but it would not be something really that's realistic at this point, because contrary to Massachusetts state law, and it was the law at the time, you're not supposed to cremate a body until, unless there's no more legal or judicial, inquiries into it. This was an unresolved homicide. It was determined a homicide, and yet George Webster had her remains cremated.
How did you and the rest of her family react when you got the news that she had been found?
I certainly started to have doubts. about Leonard Paradiso as the suspect at that point. Obviously, she was not dumped in Boston Harbor. Raising questions. And of course, we tended to walk on eggshells a little bit, but raised questions about, was this really the guy? Why do you believe so? The only thing I was told, well, it's been so long, we probably can't resolve the case. Her mother told another family member that Paradiso's girlfriend had some of Joan's jewelry. That was not the case. Once pathology was done with the tests that they were going to do after Joan was recovered, then they had her interred in New Jersey. They kept it closed. It was the only two other people there, Joan's parents, and I was there with Joan's brother, and then the choir director from the church who said a few words. No one else it wasn't open to anyone else, and her sister didn't even go. It was really bizarre.
Was there, you mentioned they were very stoic, they didn't really show any emotions. Did they have any kind of reactions or emotions once the news of her body being found, once they got that news?
They did an interview that was reported with the Essex County Police. I know they went out to the area. They expressed that they were relieved that they at least had found her remains. As I said, then they had her remains cremated, and they were buried in late July 1990. George took the tone very early on that, well, she's gone, we have to move on. This is not a warm, cuddly, fuzzy type of family, and they don't show emotions.
I think a lot of people would argue, well, not everyone shows emotions the same way. Some people are very stoic and keep things to themselves, but obviously to you that struck you as sort of strange.
I didn't try to impose how I react emotionally on them. I agree. People do react to things differently and show their emotions differently. But as I have gone through all of this, and even questions I've raised with them, they are very emotionally detached. And I find that very sad.
Leonard Paradiso seems like a big red herring in this case. Were there any suspects besides him that were looked at or maybe should have been looked at, in your opinion?
I know that after her remains were found, the husband of the woman whose property they found her remains on, he was looked at for a period of time. From what I understand, the pressure was so great that she had a nervous breakdown. She lost her practice. He was cleared. Really, there were no other suspects that they went after with any intensity. There was some questioning Michael Henry O'Hare that came out of the Zodiac theory. Obviously, he was badgered enough that he picked up sticks and moved to California. He was interrogated, but there was no legitimate reason to consider him. That too was another red herring. One that I found the Websters had really toyed with, and I use that term, consciously. They toyed with him, with Gareth Penn, kind of teasing him, as it were. And, I agree that you'll look at anything when you're trying to find someone, but when you're encouraging someone to kind of go out with stuff like that, those theories can be very hurtful. Just for anyone who's listening, I've had people contact me in regards to Zodiac theories and this and that, and they come up with some very wild and sensational things. They get angry with me or hostile if I don't agree with their suppositions. I'm very fact-based. I want facts. I don't want someone picking letters out of some cryptogram and telling me this is what that means, or the back end of an arrow shooting in this direction means he did it and was pointing to the burial site. That's baloney. I look at actual facts, and that's what I've gone to the trouble of doing, which no one really had before, is to really take a look at what happened in this case. And what I did, which is so different from what anyone else did, was I looked at the investigation. Why are these people believing this? Why are they accusing this when you've got all of these facts coming in that really debunk the notion? I mean, are you so stuck on this that you're going to, quote, make this true, whether it's real or not? And it can be very hurtful.
It sounds like you were sort of inspired to say, hey, this stuff isn't accurate, or this wasn't right, or this needs attention. And after 40 years of the case being unsolved, it seems like you took the initiative to compile this stuff and you're working on putting that into a book. Tell us about that project and what's involved in that.
I started writing things down quite some time back. I was advised by an abuse advocate to just really log everything and just kind of try to make sense of just different things I had experienced. And as I got deeper and deeper into, the records surrounding Joan's case, I could see really very early on the seriousness of the discrepancies that were there versus what I was told. I'm now at a point where I have accumulated enough information to really get a clear picture and put it into writing in a way that people can actually comprehend what happened in this case. Because it was so sensational, kind of a highly charged case, it was actually fairly difficult. I mean, usually about the time I get to the point where I say, her parents had been in the CIA, people were rolling their eyes. I understand that, and I understand trying to articulate something so complex is not easy until you have the facts. And I put the facts in order, kind of describing it, going through the other case that this was tied to, and all of the fallacies that were put out there. I don't come to an absolute conclusion in the book. Sometimes that's hard to do, but certainly I can show where the evidence points. It's an important story because cases like this really do need a spotlight. I mean, there was a lot of interest in people trying to resolve crimes, but when you've got something that's actually being obstructed, and this case is actually being obstructed, where a victim is being denied justice because people want to cover up malfeasance or whatnot. I'm a very strong supporter of law enforcement and our legal entities. However, I'm not foolish enough to realize that there are bad actors sometimes that have ulterior motives or other agendas. That is definitely what shows up here. As I said, this wasn't incompetence. This wasn't human error. This wasn't following a bad lead and then learning that it was not correct and changing course. They knew it was a bad lead. They created the lead. The individual who actually brought up the boat theory first was one of the police officers on this case.
It sounds like that it's very important to you to set the record straight and bring out the truth and sort of uncover some of the layers of things that are not accurate or maybe not.
Yeah, I think it is really important for a variety of reasons. Number one, a lot of people were hurt and victimized by what took place in this case. Certainly Joan, and she deserves justice. She had a horrible, brutal death. But there were other victims. The other murder victim that they convicted Paradiso for, she deserves real justice. And so does her family. So do loved ones. These cases really impact people's lives. It can tear families apart. There are victims there that kind of remain under the surface. They're unknown. They're silent victims. There are victims in this case that still need some resolve. And the only way you can truly have genuine healing is with the truth.
Obviously, it's something that is important. It sounds like, and again, I don't want to speak for you, but it sounds like you have some suspicion of Joan's parents, in particular George. Can you just discuss that a little bit more and what you believe there is, if there's any connection there, what that might be?
There were two things that really triggered my diving into Joan's case. One was certainly the announcement of Tim Burke's book. He announced it back in 2006. It was published in 2008. And that book is blatantly false. There's just so many erroneous statements in there, and he really manipulated things. It is a false book. That book was supported by George and Eleanor Webster. That concerned me. And I raised questions about it. Even with what I knew at the time, I knew that that was not a theory they should be promoting and supporting out there. Nothing had been tried. But also during the course of my marriage to Joan's brother, I came across a letter that had some pretty serious allegations of criminal behavior in the Webster family. I don't know if they are true or not. I know I sought help with it. It can be verified that I found this letter and other corroborating information. What I see as I go through these records and understand what the Websters knew, but they continued to blame or project a crime onto a scapegoat, that's wrong. That's frightening. They are influencing a lot of people, and people want to sympathize and empathize with them, putting their own feelings and how they would react and projecting that onto the Websters. The Websters were, as I said, stoic will be the word that I use, but they never cried. They were always matter of fact. There were things that they shared that were not true. There were things that they didn't share that should have been known for anyone to be able to cope with circumstances like this. The Websters are the ones with the secrets here. Otherwise, they would be looking for who really murdered their daughter. That's what's concerning to me, and it still impacts some lives today.
Now, did you ever confront them about your suspicions or about your questions? And if so, what was their response?
I did, and very hostile responses. There were some anonymous letters that I received. I had some very malicious harassment that I was able to trace back to Joan's sister Anne. George Webster sent me an email on Christmas night, laced with profanity, very hostile, and wishing me to die. That's not how you respond to anyone who cared enough and loved a family member and wants to know truthful answers.
And how long ago was it that you confronted them and that all this happened?
It's been a while. I've maintained some regular contact, trying to raise the questions. As I said, the responses have been very hostile. They tend to play head games, or what I would call gaslighting, and that's not acceptable. It doesn't answer the questions. The question of, how do you murder somebody on a boat that doesn't exist? Questions about Tim Burke's portrayal of certain things. For example, he identified a witness in his book that up to that point had been only identified as a confidential source. Going back and being able then to research who that individual was opened up another whole can of worms. It was just something they fabricated. They kind of took some existing facts and distorted them to suit their narrative. They claimed that this man, who had done some renovation work at Pier 7, where Paradiso's boat had been moored at one point, claimed that his divers found a gun, which they attributed to Leonard Paradiso. They claimed it was his, claimed he used it to force Joan Webster on his boat, which was already 35 feet underwater. And it turned out that when I was able to get to the appropriate records, I do have the 302 interview of that individual. What his divers found in the water was a Mercedes. I mean, it's just so glaring what these discrepancies are that you wonder who was really pulling the strings and why.
Yeah, it would seem like as a family member of a murder victim, you want the truth to be out there, and you want the right people to be held accountable, not go on some wild goose chase for someone if they really don't have anything to do with the murder of your loved one.
That's right. Because, when a true culprit is not found, who does that leave in danger? Who does that leave vulnerable? And there have been a lot of people hurt by this case.
Yeah. And what are some motives or some reasons that someone might have wanted to harm Joan?
Well, if the letter I found has any connection, then there's criminal behavior within the Webster family that they're trying to conceal. And that certainly answers a lot of questions as far as, their behaviors on certain things. The family themselves were never really probed. And I did speak to an FBI agent about that who said, in any case like this, the first people that you need to, question or remove from a list of suspects are the ones closest to the victim.
Sure, that makes sense. And that was never done at all with him?
Never done.
So the motive here, in your opinion, could be that Joan was silenced, essentially?
Absolutely.
Did anyone, any other friends or schoolmates of hers or anyone she was close to ever come forward with any other possibilities, any other scenarios that someone might have had an issue with Joan?
No, as I said, I think that was something that everybody struggled with. Who would ever want to harm Joan? Everybody loved her. She was just a wonderful person. So people were very hard pressed to think who could possibly have a motive, instead of just presuming this was a random act and she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But that really wasn't the circumstance. This was a well-contrived set of circumstances that didn't just happen by chance. I know people that were extremely grief-struck by what happened to Joan, and I know I have. I've had plenty of sleepless nights and still can start crying over the set of circumstances here. It is my belief at this point that Joan was the intended target. This was very deliberate. The evidence supports that. The secrecy about certain aspects of this case supports that. And it supports the fact that you've got to look at the people who are keeping the secrets.
Yeah. And in regards to that, on a personal level, did this affect your relationship with Joan's brother?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. After discovering the letter that I found, we then ended up getting divorced. It tears people apart.
And in regards to the letter, is there any time, or will it be in the book, that you can maybe elaborate more on that or explain what the details of that letter? Yeah,
I do touch on it. I'm sensitive to the fact that there are other victims, but I do touch on it in a little bit more detail so that people can understand this was a serious accusation against a member of the Webster family. It would be a felony if proven true. That individual would be in jail. And the Websters are very image conscious. They would take out anybody who kind of challenges the image that people have of them. It takes a lot of courage to speak out. I will guarantee you that.
Now, if I remember correctly, Joan's mom passed, but her dad's still alive?
Her father passed away too about 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
he was 90 at the time, 91.
And as far as they're concerned, they never, they denied or never admitted to any part in Joan's case. Is that correct?
No, they were staunch to the end, pointing the finger at Leonard Paradiso, and just to the point where there were things that they did or didn't do that made absolutely no sense. I mean, they were willing to excuse not, filing charges against Leonard Paradiso and taking it to trial, to try them, especially after the remains were found. They decided that he was guilty, and that was it. Nothing else to be said.
Well, and where does the case stand today? Is it active within the police department? Are they still trying to, find out what happened to Joan, or is it sort of sitting up on a shelf someplace?
It's an open case. They have 9 bankers' boxes full of records. They're very limiting on, what they have sent to my request, my Freedom of Information requests, although I've gotten some very key documents. They are not interested in resolving this case. I think I can say that definitively because I was able to present to them documents that they knew nothing about. They did not have the court records regarding the status of the boat, the crime scene. The first assistant district attorney, who really is the sole person in charge of whether anything happens with Joan's case or not, he's confirmed that he knows Tim Burke and doesn't want to focus on him. Anything that casts doubt or negativity on how this was handled, they're not going to touch. Unless I can walk in there and tell them this is who it was, this is where they took her, and whatnot, which I can't do. I had no involvement in any criminal behavior. But, it's pretty frightening. That particular assistant district attorney, his name's John Dolly. And when he first started to practice law, he joined the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, which is where Tim Burke at that time, that was the hottest topic in the office. So he was under the same tutelage. He knew about the case. He knew that they were looking at Paradiso in regards to Joan. At a later point in time, he was a defense attorney, practiced as a defense attorney, and he was the defense attorney for a man by the name of Charles Stewart. Charles Stewart and his wife were returning from a birthing class. The wife was pregnant, and they were both shot. The wife died. Charles survived, and Charles said a black man had tried to carjack them and shot them and robbed them. Turned out that Charles' brother, Matt, came forward and said, no, Charles is the killer, and I was complicit. He had the gun and took some of the wife's jewelry and threw them in the river. John Dolly, after hearing the confession of his client, refused to give any peace and solace to the family about what had been said. Charles Stewart ended up committing suicide. And so this is a real closed circle of people in Massachusetts. They're all kind of intertwined. They would rather circle the wagons than really offer justice to a true victim or see any relief to loved ones.
Yeah, and the real shame is here that after 40 years, Joan's case is unsolved, and she had a bright future, and the truth is still not out on what happened, and hopefully somehow, some way against the odds are probably against it, but hopefully something comes out that breaks the case open and gives it new life.
Yeah,
I can't thank you enough for spending this much time walking us through this, because there's so much minutia to this case and so many moving parts that I think the work you've done on compiling everything and sort of laying everything out has been very helpful. If people want to find you or interact with you or follow you, do you have any websites or social media where they can locate you?
I do have social media. I've actually posted quite a bit on Joan's case on Web Sleuth. So there is a thread there for Joan Webster's case. And, I have a LinkedIn under my name, Eve Carson. I also have a Facebook page. I'm didn't grow up with social media, so I don't use it a lot, but I use it some. But there will be more coming out. We will be doing a web page with the book. The book is due out in January, and I'm very excited because one of the first people to review the book went through it, initially getting lost with the number of people that were involved in this, but by the end, absolutely got it. Absolutely got it.
And one more time, what is the book and when will it be out?
The title of the book is going to be Simple, Safe, and Secret. And it will be out about the third week of January.
Well, I think a lot of people that are interested in this case should go out and get it, because I think we're just scratching the surface here on what we talked about. But
we are.
Yeah, I think the book's going to offer a lot more detail. Again, I can't thank you enough for coming on, Eve, and I wish you well with the book, and I hope that you get to the bottom of what happened here.
I appreciate it too, and I can't thank you enough, Mike. People need to have a voice to be able to say, hey, got to look at this. Otherwise, if you don't learn from mistakes, then you don't find the answers. You have to look for them.
Thank you once again for joining me for this episode of The Murder of My Family. I'd like to thank Sonny Landon for writing and research assistance in this episode. We'll be back here soon with an all-new episode of The Murder of My Family, and I hope you'll join me for it. But before you go, remember that every murder victim means something to somebody.